Wow, this show definitely has a thing for JJs, doesn't it? Hello, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well because I am here to review the second episode. Sorry, I meant second, not four. Second episode of It. Welcome to Derry. I'm sorry, I probably got a few more screws loose on this review because this is actually the second time I'm recording it because my microphone died and I didn't learn about that until I was editing and thought I was almost done for the night. So here we go. Anyways, I hope you had a wonderful Halloween because they released this episode on Halloween night as a special gift to everybody. So I hope you enjoyed a nice spooky Halloween with your loved ones if you celebrate it. But coming into this episode, kind of speaking generally before I get into specifics, this one kind of had a tall order, right? Because I went into the first episode kind of expecting it to be like It Redux, that sort of like cynical remake of It just made for a TV show, because ultimately that's just what these like corporate mandated like milking IP things generally do. And that's kind of what the first episode was until the very ending where it pulled out the rug from us and killed all of its or most of its main protagonists. So this episode kind of had to do the work of like now setting up like, okay, what are we actually going to do? What are we actually focusing on? And giving us both our real protagonists by introducing a few new characters and then sort of better setting up some of the arcs for the characters that did survive the end of last week's episode. And I think ultimately this episode suffers a little bit because of that, because it is kind of moving us into position for what the show is actually trying to do based off of what it was doing last episode. So it's kind of like a transitional episode. That being said, though, there are some really fun things here and things that I really do like, but the ending of this episode, which I'll focus on when I get there, but I'm just going to say it now, is so beautifully dumb that I can't help but be excited about it. Without spoiling just yet, where this show ends is clearly what the pitch of this show was. Like someone in a boardroom sat down and said, all right, what if this show is about this? And everyone's like, oh my God, that's great. Let's do that. That's clearly what the ending of this episode is angling for and was the pitch of the season. And personally, I think it is so silly and so ridiculous. And probably is going to be bad, but in a fun way, I am here for it. Like, maybe it'll turn out to be great, and I'm also here for that. But, like, just based on this, like, the campiness of the idea, it's so silly, but it's kind of exactly what I want out of a show like this. We'll talk about it more when I get there. Let's start breaking some of this down. Like I said, we get sort of introduced to some new characters. We meet Leroy's family. We meet Will, his son, who ultimately we don't learn a ton about just yet. We clearly get this sense that he's a nerd who doesn't really have a good connection with his father. I thought that was well handled. And then also when he goes to school, he is obviously getting blamed for stuff that's not his fault, which I kind of like in terms of how it's presented, and this will kind of carry over into some other stuff, because it's clearly a level of racism that's happening there in terms of how Will is being treated by that one teacher that we see, that she's like blaming him and not giving him any quarter, even though he's like a new student, and just automatically assuming he's a troublemaker when that bomb goes off and blames him and sends him to detention. But it's not very explicitly stated. It's not like she's just going, oh, this black kid, or even worse, like there's not over the top, like on the nose racism. Not that there wouldn't be, like that is definitely a thing that exists, but I like that there's a little bit more subtlety to what's going on here. And we kind of see that a little bit more with, I believe Charlotte is her name, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlotte, Leroy's wife, because we very much right from the beginning get this sense of like, oh, they're a black family living in this very white Americana village in city, whatever town in the 1960s. I keep wanting to say suburbs, so it's not really the suburbs, but this very like white town in the 1960s where they probably would not be welcome or not be wanted, even by people who say, oh, I'm not racist at all. And you definitely get that sense of unease as she's walking through the town. But ultimately, at the end of the day, she's never really confronted directly about that. But where she does stick out is when she sees the boys fighting and hurting the other boy, and she stands up against it. She stands up against that boys will be boys mentality. And I really love that's the moment where she starts to stick out, and that you can tell that like her being an other, her being black is also sort of like centralizing their vilification of her and her otherization there. Because fundamentally these towns, these like very white Americana towns, are built on these like boys will be boys attitudes of like reinforcing these hegemonic norms of masculinity and like women and how women are treated that we see elsewhere in the episode too, even for the white kids like Lily, that she is challenging just by being there and saying, no, we're not going to let boys will be boys. That's not okay. And that is what gets her signaled out. Obviously, I also like the dog mentality as well. Clearly, that'll come up in some horror imagery, I'm sure, later, that we sort of get the music of the dogs in that scene. But it's just very good at, like, yes, there's racism informing all of this, but it's also, like, her directly going at the, like, fundamental hierarchies and beliefs of this town that is steeped in, like, the whiteness of it. But we can also see there's other racism elsewhere, right? Because we have Hank, I believe is the projectionist name, the guy who owns the movie theater, the Black House movie theater, and his daughter, Ronnie. And you can see that the town, even the police, are very clearly, like, out to get Hank. And that does come down to racism. Like, okay, they believe that it's the black guy who did this. Like, they don't have any proof. They don't have any reason to necessarily believe other than, like, it happened on his property. But, like, they're willing to go out him and get him. And you can see that racism come out. Well, later on in the bar, later on we have the guy talking to the sheriff saying, like, oh yeah, this isn't America, this is Derry. Pointing at the fact that, like, Derry is trying to reinforce, like, its norms, going after the black guy. Like, there is racism in that. And I think that was fairly astute. And you also see the racism going at, like, Dick Halloran, who's here, which I really love, by the way. I'll get to him in just a second. But we see racism directed towards him and the other black service members that are just trying to relax outside of the base, and the racism that they confront, even trying to get back into the base. So it's all here. And it's not like, but I like that it's, like, going at an undercurrent of how these black characters both are treated as black people, but also the undercurrent of, like, how they challenge the norms of Derry. And I think that that's a cool, slightly more complex than I would have thought the show would have dealt with way to deal with racism, especially given it's based on Stephen King, who I love. Stephen King, an author who I really love. Read a lot of The Dark Tower and a lot of the adjacent media to The Dark Tower, a lot of his other books, but fundamentally, you know, he is not without problems in the terms of how he depicts racism in many of his books. Let's just say there's certainly a conversation to be had. Let's just put it that way. But I also like how we also see things come out, and, like, with Ronnie talking to Lily, being like, she's feeling guilt over, like, her dad might be getting arrested. And she talks to Lily, he's like, look, the police are going to assume he's the bad guy here. You need to say something. And Lily, you know, she's like a kid dealing with a lot of other things about being othered and not wanting to fit in. And so she feels this, like, pressure from these adults and, like, fear of being further marginalized herself by getting sent to the asylum, as we see at the end of the episode, that she's pressured into sort of not even, like, the police even reword it, which I think was such a smart, like, horrifying thing that they do, is like, you don't not believe that he wasn't there, do you? And so she feels pressured into doing the thing that to avoid her own harm. But again, it's like playing into all these systemic harms against black people, which is really good. The other thing that I really like is the scares here. I said this last week. The scares in this show never really scare me. I personally like a little bit more subtler horror. I'm not really a gore hound, nor do I get freaked out by over-the-top gore, which is a lot of what the show does. It starts, like, where this show starts, generally with this creeps are scary to me. And I do like them. Like, the liminal stuff in the grocery store with Lily was absolutely terrifying at first. But then it ends in, like, her dad's head in a jar and tentacles and, like, pulling, like, none of that stuff really scares me. It's too over the top, too maximalist for me. But I do enjoy watching it. It's like, it's a fun type of, like, gore. It's like, I'm not scared, but I like watching it. It's very, very fun. And I like that we're kind of focusing on, like, not only Ronnie and her scare with her mom, which is, again, the visuals in that with the vagina and her mom, like, horrifying, absolutely horrifying. But it's honing in on her guilt at, like, not only her mother's death, like, she died in childbirth, but also for her father as well. It's a similar thing. She's worried about her parents, and she feels guilt over it the same way she feels guilt for her mom dying in childbirth. And I like that this show kind of turns it on, like, normally when we deal with, like, the horror of childbirth in horror movies, it's usually directed at, like, the horror of the woman giving birth. But the trauma here that we've seen both in last episode and in this episode is, like, the horror for those who were given birth to, like, the trauma of that and that whole part of it, of, like, witnessing it, which I think is, like, kind of an interesting twist on that idea, kind of a different way to play with it. It still ultimately relies a little bit on the horror of women's bodies, which I don't particularly love. This is a reason that I wasn't in love with The Substance as a lot of people else were last year with that movie. I still like the movie The Substance. It's enjoyable, but ultimately, and I think Broy Deschanel did a really great video essay on this, it's ultimately a movie that is, like, asking us to, like, find horror at a woman's body, like a sagging breast or like an aging woman. Like, yes, in a more horrific, over-the-top way, but still, like, the horror comes from, like, the horror of a woman's body. And we get a kind of similar thing here of like, oh, her vagina has like teeth and all of that jazz. So like, it's not a type of horror that I particularly love. However, the twist on it in this show of it being about like the kids' fear and like of childbirth and pregnancy and all of that jazz, that's kind of a new twist on that I actually find to be I'm curious about, and I'm curious to see how it's going to evolve within this show and what they're going to ultimately do with that. So interested. Like, again, not the type of horror I would have chosen. But there's some interesting stuff you could do with that, and they seem to be angling in that direction. So excited about that. Ultimately, though, I think we have Leroy on his little murder mystery, which ultimately reveals that it was a test or whatever. I found that to be a little like circuitous and being like, all right, it feels like you were just wasting time to ultimately justify Leroy getting into the stuff that we're gonna get into in just a second. So I thought it was a fine enough mystery, but I didn't really fully buy it. But again, it gets us to where it needs to go, which I enjoy, because we have Dick Halloran here, and I like that the actor who's playing him is very much bringing the same energy as the actor from The Shining, as well as, he was also in, oh my god, why am I blanking, the sequel of The Shining, Dr. Sleep, which was also fantastic. I think there's another actor in that one. Anyways, bringing the same energy, and so I like that. But I like that he's in a different place, and he's using his shine for the U.S. government as their, full spoiler here, they're trying to find it, so they can use it as a weapon in the Cold War. And Leroy is also going to be part of that. He's going to be like the man without fear who can face it. I find this so dumb, but in a way that excites me. Because ultimately, like I said, I don't think the show is going to knock my socks off. I mean, maybe it will, but I come into this show being like, hey, yeah, it was going to be like a cynical like redoing of it. It surprised me in a few ways, but I still don't like have a hope for like being like amazing, oh my god, like it's Severance level stuff. However, if you're going to take this down the route of being like campy, dumb fun of like, yeah, we're going to capture it and it's going to be American government versus it, that sounds just the right level of camp dumb that I really, really enjoy. And again, credit to the show. Maybe they will like do something like, you know, really great with it and super clever, but ultimately my expectation is it's going to be campy, dumb fun. And that is just fine with me. I am here for campy, dumb fun. So if this show wants to do campy, dumb fun, here for it. Cool. I am very, very, I cannot express to you how excited I am for that. I talked to some of my friends about this twist, and they were like, oh man, that sounds so groan-worthy. I don't know, that sounds really dumb. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm excited. It does sound dumb. It sounds dumb in the best way. I'm all in. All right. That's my review, though, ultimately. This episode itself, it's some good setup. Gets us set up for some other stuff, but it does get me more excited for what's to come. Because in my mind, it sounds like it's just stupid enough to work in a fun way. What did you think, though? I love your thoughts on it. Welcome to Derry. Did you like this episode? Were you scared by it? Do you also think vajayjays have teeth? Who knows? I certainly, nope, not going to make that joke. Not going to make a trans joke. Nope, we're going to end there. Love y'all. Oh, let me know in the comments what you're thinking, and I hope y'all live long and prosper.